Here is a grocery receipt from 1955. Not a real receipt, those are almost impossible to find intact, but a reconstructed one, built from USDA commodity price data for that year. 1 pound of dried navy beans, 9 cents. 1 ham hock from the butcher, 11 cents. 1 onion, 2 cents. 2 bay leaves from the tin in the cabinet, effectively 0. Total cost of that evening's dinner for a family of 5, 22 cents. The same dinner today, dried navy beans, a smoked ham hock, an onion, bay leaves, enough for 5 people with leftovers, costs approximately $7 to $9, depending on where you shop. That is a 35 to 40 times increase in nominal price. Adjusted for inflation, a 22-cent meal in 1955 is roughly $2.20 in today's money, which means the actual relative cost of this meal has increased by a factor of 3 to 4, even after accounting for inflation. Something happened between 1955 and now that made the simplest, most functional meals in American history either forgotten or expensive. This video is about what those meals were. 12 of them. All of them capable of feeding 5 people. All of them, in 1955, achievable for under $2. Let's go through all 12. Dinner 1. Navy bean soup with ham hock. Cost in 1955, approximately 22 cents for 5 servings. The beans went into a pot of cold water the night before. By morning, they had absorbed the water and swelled to roughly twice their dried size. In the afternoon, 3 hours before the family was expected at the table, the soaked beans went into a fresh pot of cold water with the ham hock, a roughly halved onion, 2 bay leaves, and a pinch of black pepper. The pot went onto the back burner at a low simmer. No other intervention for 2.5 hours. What happened in that pot during those 2.5 hours is the kind of cooking that modern kitchen equipment has tried to replicate and never quite matched. The collagen in the ham hock broke down into the broth, thickening it gradually. The beans absorbed the smoky, savory liquid as they cooked. The fat from the hock rendered slowly into the soup, carrying with it the flavor compounds that distinguish a ham and bean soup made this way from any version made with canned beans and chicken broth. After 2.5 hours, the ham hock came out of the pot. The meat was pulled from the bone with 2 forks. There was not very much of it, but what there was distributed through the soup gave every bowl something substantial to find. The soup was served with whatever bread was on hand. If it was a weekday, that was the store-bought loaf. If it was a weekend, it was the cornbread made in the cast-iron skillet. Either way, the bread was the second component of a complete meal that together cost under 25 cents. What made this meal possible was not technique. Anyone could do it. What made it possible was time. The 3 hours between the pot going on and the family sitting down, and the willingness to use the cheapest cuts of meat, not as a compromise, but as a deliberate choice. Because those cuts, cooked this way, produced better food than the expensive ones. Dinner 2. Potato soup with bacon. Cost in 1955. Approximately 18 cents for 5 servings. 4 large potatoes, peeled and diced. 1 onion, diced. 3 strips of bacon. Whatever milk was on hand, whole milk in a 1955 kitchen. Salt. A tablespoon of butter if there was some going soft on the counter. The bacon went into the pot first, rendered over medium heat until the fat was out and the strips were crisp. The strips set aside on a cloth. The diced onion went into the bacon fat, not into fresh oil, into the fat already in the pot, and cooked until translucent and beginning to color. Then the potatoes, and enough water to cover them by an inch. 20 minutes at a simmer until the potatoes were completely soft. A potato masher brought through the pot, not a blender, not a food processor, Just the masher worked through the pot until some of the potatoes were fully mashed and others remained in chunks. This gave the soup body without making it uniform. The milk went in. The butter went in. Salt adjusted. The bacon crumbled over the top of each bowl. Potato soup made this way, with the bacon fat as the cooking medium for the onion, with the potato mashed partially in the pot, is a different food from potato soup made with vegetable broth and boiled separately. The fat carries the bacon flavor through the entire soup. The partial mash produces a texture that is simultaneously creamy and substantial. The crumbled bacon on top gives each bowl a textural contrast and a concentrated flavor hit at the first spoonful. Total cost, 18 cents. For 5 people, with enough for lunch the next day if the pot was not emptied. Dinner 3. Macaroni and beef. Cost in 1955, approximately 31 cents for 5 servings. This was not macaroni and cheese. This was a different dish, more substantial, more savory, built around the cheapest ground beef that the butcher sold and the box of elbow macaroni that was always in the pantry. Half a pound of ground beef, at roughly 20 cents a pound in 1955, a dime's worth of meat, browned in a pan until cooked through and broken into small pieces. 1 can of diced tomatoes, or 2 fresh tomatoes chopped if it was summer. 1 small onion, diced and added to the beef partway through the browning. Salt, a bay leaf, a pinch of dried thyme if there was any. The cooked macaroni, a full box, boiled separately and drained, stirred into the beef and tomato mixture. The whole thing simmered together for 5 minutes so the macaroni absorbed the liquid in the pan. This is not a glamorous dish. It is not the kind of thing that appears in a restaurant. It is the kind of thing that appears in the kitchen of a family that is feeding 5 people on what they have and doing it well. The dish has a dozen names across American regional cooking. American chop suey in New England, goulash in the Midwest, slumgullion in other places. All of them are the same basic combination: ground meat, tomatoes, pasta, aromatics, cooked together until the pasta absorbs the sauce. All of them cost almost nothing and taste like they cost considerably more. Total cost with the pasta and the canned tomato? 31 cents. Dinner 4. Pinto beans and cornbread. Cost in 1955. Approximately 20 cents for 5 servings. The beans cooked the same way as the navy beans, soaked overnight, simmered with aromatics for 2 to 3 hours. In the Southwest and the South, the aromatics were different. Dried chili peppers, cumin if there was any, a piece of salt pork instead of the ham hock, sometimes a small dried onion. The cornbread was made in the cast iron skillet. Cornmeal, baking powder, salt, an egg, buttermilk or regular milk. The skillet greased with bacon drippings and placed in a hot oven while the batter was mixed. The batter poured into the hot greased skillet, which gave the cornbread its characteristic dark crust on the bottom. Back in the oven for 20 minutes. This combination, pinto beans cooked with pork and aromatics, served in a bowl alongside a wedge of hot cornbread torn and dipped into the bean liquid, is one of the most complete, most satisfying, most nutritionally adequate meals in the American food tradition. The bean liquid, the pot liquor, was not discarded. It was the liquid component of the meal. The cornbread went into it. The plate was cleaned with the last piece of cornbread. For 20 cents, 5 people ate a meal that provided protein, complex carbohydrate, fat, and a level of genuine satiety that a modern meal costing 10 times as much does not consistently deliver. Dinner 5. Creamed tuna on toast. Cost in 1955, approximately 27 cents for 5 servings. Friday night, in households that observed the Catholic tradition of no meat on Fridays, and in many that did not. 2 cans of tuna, at roughly 8 cents per can in 1955, 16 cents total. A white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, salt and pepper. The white sauce, the roux-based sauce that was the foundation of so much 1950s cooking, went together in 5 minutes. Butter melted in the pan. An equal amount of flour stirred in and cooked briefly until it smelled nutty and stopped tasting raw. Milk added gradually, whisked constantly, until the sauce thickened to a consistency that coated the back of a spoon. The tuna, drained, folded in. Toast, 5 thick slices from the loaf, or biscuits if there were any, on the plates. The creamed tuna ladled over. The result is not complicated food. It is honest food. The white sauce binds the tuna into a cohesive, warm, creamy topping. The toast provides the starch and the texture contrast. The meal is complete, and it is filling. And it is done in 15 minutes from a cold kitchen. At 27 cents for 5 servings, it is also the least expensive complete protein meal on this list. If this video is making you think differently about what a real meal actually requires, subscribe to the channel. Every day we look at how American grandmothers fed their families with less money, less equipment, and less time than most people think is possible. Hit the bell and keep going. We are halfway through 12. Dinner 6. Vegetable beef soup from the week's leftovers. Cost in 1955, approximately 25 cents for 5 servings. The most important thing about this soup is that it was not made from purchased ingredients. It was made from what had accumulated in the refrigerator through the week. The pot roast from Sunday, whatever remained of it, cut into small pieces. The carrots and potatoes that had cooked with the pot roast, also whatever remained. Half an onion. 2 stalks of celery that were going soft. Whatever vegetables had been on the table through the week and had not been finished. Green beans, corn cut from the cob, a handful of peas from a can that had been opened for another dish. The broth from the pot roast, saved in a jar in the refrigerator since Sunday, providing the liquid base. Everything into the pot. Brought to a simmer. Adjusted with salt. A bay leaf. 30 minutes. The 25 cents in this case accounts for the small additional expenditures. The bay leaf, perhaps a small amount of additional broth, the gas used to cook it. The primary ingredients were already paid for when the Sunday roast was purchased. This soup was the Sunday roast's second life, and in many households it was better than the roast itself, because the flavors had had days to develop and concentrate. The household that plans this way, that buys a Sunday roast knowing it will become a Thursday soup, does not waste food. The USDA estimates modern American households waste 30 to 40% of what they buy. The household making this soup wasted almost nothing. Dinner 7. Dried split pea soup. Cost in 1955, approximately 15 cents for 5 servings. The least expensive dinner on this list. 1 pound of dried split peas. 1 smoked ham hock, or a ham bone saved from a previous meal, or simply a piece of salt pork. 1 onion. 2 carrots. 2 stalks of celery. A bay leaf. Salt. Water. Everything into the pot together. Split peas do not require soaking the way whole dried beans do. Brought to a boil, skimmed, reduced to a simmer. 1.5 to 2 hours. What happens to split peas over this time is different from what happens to whole beans. The split peas dissolve. They break down into the liquid, thickening it from a soup into something closer to a porridge. A thick, dense, deeply savory bowl that requires a spoon capable of standing upright in it. The flavor is specific to dried split peas cooked with pork. It is unlike any other soup. Not mild, not delicate. Substantial and filling in a way that suggests it was designed for people who needed fuel. It was. This was winter food. Working family food. Minimum expenditure, maximum satiety food. For 15 cents, 5 people had a bowl of soup so thick and filling that no one left the table hungry. Not as a sacrifice, as the intended result.
Dinner 8. Salt pork and green beans with potatoes. Cost in 1955. Approximately 28 cents for 5 servings. 1 pound of fresh or home-canned green beans. 3 or 4 medium potatoes cut into rough chunks. A piece of salt pork, roughly a quarter pound, the cheapest part of the hog, practically free at some butcher counters where it was considered a byproduct rather than a cut. The salt pork went into the pot with enough water to cover. Brought to a boil, the water changed once to remove some of the excess salt from the curing. Then fresh water, the green beans, the potatoes, a pinch of black pepper. Low simmer for an hour. What an hour of slow cooking does to green beans is not what 5 minutes of blanching does. The green beans of the 1950s pot were cooked past what any modern recipe would consider appropriate. They were soft, yielding, thoroughly penetrated by the pork-flavored liquid they had been cooking in. The color was not the bright green of a vegetable that has been cooked quickly. It was the olive green of something that had been transformed. Whether this transformation is desirable is a matter of taste. What is not a matter of taste is what those green beans tasted like. They tasted like the pot they came from, of pork and pepper and something mineral and deep that the combination of a long simmer and a cheap cut of pork produces reliably. The potatoes absorbed the same liquid. The pot liquor remaining after the vegetables and pork were served was the liquid component of the meal. It went over the potatoes in the bowl. It was the sauce. For 28 cents. Dinner 9. Salmon patties. Cost in 1955. Approximately 24 cents for 5 servings. 10 patties, 2 per person. 2 cans of pink salmon, at roughly 8 cents per can. 1 egg. 2 tablespoons of flour or cornmeal. Salt. Black pepper. A little onion, grated or minced very fine. Bacon drippings from the crock beside the stove. The salmon drained and picked over for any bones. The bones in canned salmon in the 1950s were left in and were soft enough to eat, and most families ate them, but some removed them. The egg, the flour, the grated onion, the salt and pepper mixed in. The mixture formed into 10 small patties about the size of the palm of a hand. The cast iron skillet with a tablespoon of bacon drippings heated until the drippings shimmered. The patties in the hot fat. 4 minutes per side without moving. The patience to wait for the crust to form before turning was the technique. The result was a patty with a dark, crisp exterior and a moist interior that tasted of salmon and pork and the slight nuttiness of cooked cornmeal. Served with whatever vegetable was on hand. Sliced tomatoes in summer, canned corn in winter, whatever the week had produced. Salmon patties were Friday food in many households. They were also the food that appeared whenever the week had been tight and the cost of the next meal was a real calculation. 2 cans of salmon and 1 egg and some flour produced 10 patties. For 24 cents. Dinner 10. Bread and milk. Cost in 1955. Approximately 8 cents for 5 servings. The simplest meal on this list. This one requires explanation because it sounds like nothing. Bread and milk. Sometimes called bread and milk supper or simply milk soup, was a genuine meal in the 1950s rural and working-class American household. Day-old bread torn into rough pieces in a bowl.
cold, whole milk poured over it, a small amount of sugar if the family used sugar in this preparation, or salt and pepper in savory households. The bread absorbed the milk and became something between a soup and a porridge. Soft, cool, filling in the quiet way that dairy and carbohydrate are filling. It was evening food, eaten simply, at a table, without any particular ceremony. This meal exists in virtually every food culture. The Italians have ribollita and panzanella. The French have pain perdu. The English have bread and butter pudding. The American version was the most stripped down of all. Bread, milk, and nothing else. But it represented the same understanding, that bread past its fresh prime and surplus milk from a farm or a bottle could together constitute a complete meal for people who needed feeding. For 8 cents, less than 2 cents per person. Dinner 11. Fried cornmeal mush. Cost in 1955, approximately 12 cents for 5 servings. Cornmeal mush is cornmeal cooked in salted water until it thickens to a porridge consistency, roughly the consistency of firm polenta. Made in the evening, poured into a loaf pan or a baking dish and left in the refrigerator overnight. By the next morning, or by the next evening, in households that made this as a dinner rather than a breakfast, the mush had firmed into a sliceable solid. Cut into slices roughly half an inch thick. Fried in a cast iron skillet in bacon drippings until dark and crisp on both sides. Served with maple syrup for a sweet version. Served with gravy from the previous night's meat for a savory one. Served with fried eggs on top if there were eggs. Served simply with salt and a pat of butter if none of those things were available. Fried cornmeal mush is not complicated food. It is not food that requires any skill. It requires cornmeal, water, salt, a pan, time, and the knowledge that the mush needs to be made the day before it is served. That knowledge, make it today, eat it tomorrow, is the kind of knowledge that requires a relationship with cooking that spans more than a single meal. It requires thinking ahead. It requires using the refrigerator as a tool rather than a storage space. For 12 cents, 5 people had a hot meal made from one of the cheapest ingredients in any American pantry. Dinner 12. Potato hash with whatever meat was left. Cost in 1955, approximately 22 cents for 5 servings. This is the meal that used the meal before it. Leftover meat, the roast from Sunday, the pork chop that one person did not finish, the half-eaten chicken, cut or shredded into small pieces, boiled or leftover potatoes diced, an onion diced, bacon drippings in the skillet. The onion went in first over medium-high heat, cooked until it had color. The potatoes in next, spread in a single layer across the skillet, pressed down with a spatula and left alone for 4 minutes to develop a crust. Turned in sections, not stirred, turned, and pressed down again for another 4 minutes. The meat folded in at the end and given a minute to heat through. Salt, black pepper, an egg fried on top in some households, eaten directly from the skillet in others. Hash was the great utilitarian dish of the 1950s American kitchen. It could absorb any leftover meat. It could be made from any leftover potato. It required 1 pan and 30 minutes, and it produced a meal that was better, more cohesive, more flavorful than the separate components that went into it. The 22 cents accounts for the onion, the bacon drippings, and the gas. The meat and potatoes were already paid for. The hash, in other words, was almost free. 12 dinners. The cheapest cost 8 cents. The most expensive cost 31. The average across all 12 is approximately 21 cents per meal for a family of 5, roughly $2.10 in today's money. What connects all 12 is not poverty. These were not hunger meals. They were not the meals of people who could not afford to eat. They were the meals of people who had learned to cook in a way that made the most of everything available and wasted almost none of it. The navy bean soup was better for the ham hock that cost 11 cents than it would have been with a more expensive cut. The vegetable beef soup was better for being made from Sunday's roast than it would have been from fresh ingredients. The hash was better for the leftover potatoes than it would have been from freshly boiled ones. This is the thing that was lost when convenience food replaced scratch cooking and when the grocery store became the only source of meal ingredients rather than one component of a kitchen that also ran on its own accumulated stores. The meals on this list required a pantry. They required dried beans and cornmeal and a crock of bacon drippings and a tin of canned salmon. They required the habit of saving and the knowledge of what to do with what you had saved. That habit and that knowledge are recoverable. The ingredients are still available. The pots are still sold. The skills required, a simmer, a roux, a turn of the hash, take an afternoon to learn and a few weeks of practice to own. My grandmother fed 5 people on these meals, not as a sacrifice, as the ordinary, unremarkable business of keeping a family fed. She did not think of it as frugal. She thought of it as cooking. 12 dinners. Navy bean soup with ham hock. Potato soup with bacon. Macaroni and beef. Pinto beans and cornbread. Creamed tuna on toast. Vegetable beef soup from the week's leftovers. Split pea soup. Salt pork and green beans with potatoes. Salmon patties. Bread and milk. Fried cornmeal mush. Potato hash with whatever meat was left. Total cost in 1955, under $2 for 5 people. Every single time. The meals exist. The ingredients are in the grocery store. The techniques are learnable in an afternoon. What requires more than an afternoon is the shift in relationship with the kitchen. From a place you use when you decide to cook to a system that runs continuously, that saves what it produces, that uses the week's accumulation as tomorrow's starting point. My grandmother did not think about that shift. She never had to make it. She started in a kitchen that already worked that way, and she never left it. The kitchen is still there. The recipes, the ones that are not really recipes at all, just processes, are still there. Leave a comment below and tell me which of these 12 you grew up eating. Tell me the name your family used for it. Because hash and slumgullion and chop suey are all the same dish with 100 different names. And I want to know which name was yours. Like the video if the bread and milk surprised you. Subscribe for more of this every day. Come back tomorrow. There's more where this came from.